I've got baked textures, and it's all looking pretty well. But you see, I've got two beds here, and there's a reason for doing this. This one here is the optimized model. It's been worked on a little to make it more friendly for Second Life, whereas this one is the unoptimized model. Now, if we look at the difference here, if I edit this, we'll look at the land impact of 80. Whereas if we look at this one, I've got a land impact of 9. Big difference. So if we click on the more info button here, up around here, we'll see we got a breakdown of the weights. Okay, which the 80 is coming from the download, and that basically is the amount of geometry. The physics is also very high at 44.5, whereas if I select this bed, you'll see my physics is 0.8 with a download of 8.6. So there is a big difference. But what are those differences? Well, let's try going into a wireframe mode, which I believe is Control Shift R. Yep, Control Shift R. To get wireframe mode, you need, I think it's the developer menu, or is it the advanced? One or both of these menus enabled. As for specific viewer, you're going to have to yeah, what did I do there? Let me turn whatever that was off. I'm not going to find it. Where was it? There's one of these. Show render info. That was it. Okay. To see the difference, we're going to have to go into wireframe mode here, and what we're looking at is the density of the geometry. You see on my optimized bed, I have worked quite a bit with the geometry to reduce it, and you can see this specifically on the sheet and the pillows. Compared to here, there's very little geometry. This is very dense, and this is what we're going to work on. So we're going to hop back into Blender, and I'll show you how you go about optimizing a model for Second Life. So I'm just going to pause here for a little bit, wherever that is, over here, and I'll see you in a minute. Back in Blender, and you can see I've got my two models side by side. So I've got the optimized model on the left and the high poly model, the unoptimized model, on the right. If we go back into a wireframe mode, forget my keys here, wireframe, okay, let's deselect everything, yeah, it will deselect everything, so we can see a similar kind of thing. We've got some very dense geometry around the pillows and on the sheet, whereas we come over this one, this geometry has been reduced greatly. There's still dense areas where we need to detail, but it's a lot less, and we do have a bit of dense geometry on the posts and the boards here, but I'm not too concerned about that. Relatively speaking, it is nothing compared to the sheets. So let me go back into a texture mode, and this is the low poly model. This is the high poly model. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I've actually separated these onto two layers. So I want to concentrate on my high poly model and getting some of that geometry down. So that is on layer number 1. Okay. So I've just hidden the other layers. So I'm just working on this model. Right. So the first thing, the thing with the most geometry is probably going to be this sheet. So if I edit that and select everything, you can see I have faces, 10,010 faces in this, and if you convert that into triangles, because it is all quads, that's 20,000 quads, which is way too much. So what can we do about this? We need to reduce this geometry, and there's a couple of ways we can do this, depending on the result or the effect you want. Okay, we can do it either in edit mode with something called limited dissolve. Now limited dissolve doesn't have a keystroke, so you have to press your spacebar to get a search menu. Actually, if I delete everything of this, you get this search menu, and you just start to type in limited dissolve, and you see here mesh limited dissolve. Okay, now the CPU's hanging up a bit at the moment. That's because there is so many vertices here, but anyway, it's come here and we'll see here we've got a max angle. I don't know what the standard is. This is really going to hang up. 5 is where I did my last limited dissolve, so remember that. Come on, stop hanging up, Blender. There we go. If I do a max angle of say 30 and enter, okay, no, it's a lower one. Let me go back to, let's just say an angle of 1. Come on, there we go. Okay, our faces are reduced in half, basically, just under half. We're now at 4,300, where we were at 5,050, I believe. The way limited dissolve works is it looks at each of these faces and the adjacent face, and it measures the angle difference between them. Now, if the angle is greater, is less than this 1 degrees, it's going to dissolve those faces together, and that's why it's called a limited dissolve, because you're limited by the angle. You can play around with this, and I found that with mine, well, actually, let's go further. Let's go to 10 degrees. I think my original was 5 degrees. Let's go to 10 and see what happens when you go too far. And waiting for Blender to do its thing. Now you see I'm starting to get some artifacts because of the unwrapping, and it's just dissolved too much of the geometry. I'm starting to get this line down here. I'm getting a line across the middle of the sheet, and it's really not what I wanted. So I found earlier that on this particular sheet, 5 was a good midpoint compromise. So I've just entered in 5 there. Wait for that to come together, and you see there is some slight artifact in there. It's gone from the top. There's a slight line here, but that actually looks like a fold in the sheet, and I'm quite happy with that. Okay, let's go back to the full geometry and show you the other method. So Control Z or Z backwards. There we go. We're now back at our 10,000 faces. Right, the other way we can do this is with a decimate modifier. So we can work with modifiers in object mode, and we come to the modifiers tab and we'll add a decimate, and what we got here is a ratio. Okay, so no decimation is 1, full decimation down to a single triangle would be 0, and we can use this slider to reduce some of this geometry. But once again, you're going to have to watch how your texture is mapping, because you're changing the geometry. The texture will kind of alter slightly. So let's just try this. Let's pull this slider down, and if you're watching the texture, you can see how it's deforming a bit to the point where the model collapses. Now you could be happy with you know, at any point in this, it's entirely up to you. But what I'm trying to preserve is some of these folds and stuff that we put in the corners, and I'm trying not to distort the texture too much. So I'm watching all of this as I'm playing with my slider. If we get down to around about the same level we were with the limited dissolve at 5 degrees, which is 4,300. I notice, you know, some of these textures are stretching in a way that I don't like that much. Now, because I've been working with this texture, I know what it's supposed to look like. So I'm probably a bit more fussy about it. If you're just seeing this for the first time, you probably wouldn't notice it. But I'm also looking over here, and I'm losing this detail on the folds here on the corner. If I bring this back, you see how you start to lose it. Okay, but they both have similar results, so it's up to you which one you want to use. I personally preferred the limited dissolve, but no, we'll go with this one. That's fine. Let's bring it down to a similar kind of level, 4,300 faces, somewhere around there. Okay, and we can apply this modifier. Now we go into edit mode. We'll be able to see what it's done, and what it's done is it's no longer all quads, but because this is not a rigged model, this is not a this is a static model. Having triangles at this stage just prior to uploading is not going to affect anything, because there's nothing to move, so nothing to kind of show those triangles as it's moving. Right, so I mean that's fine, that will work. Right, so the next area I worked on was the pillows. So if we edit them, and I think for these I did do limited dissolve, so we'll try that again. I can probably go a bit more on the angle here. It's keeping its shape quite nicely, and let's say there around about 11 or see there the pillow's starting to flatten out. I don't want that flattened out, I want some of that form, so somewhere about there I think is good. 9.4. Right, so we tab into object mode, we tab back into edit mode. That limited dissolve has stuck. Right, where else can we make savings? Well, if we look under the bed, we've got all this kind of sheet area that is never ever going to be seen. Okay, so we could probably delete a lot of that geometry. So best way to do this, okay, let's select the sheet and let's go into edit mode, and if we look at our UV, we've already baked this texture, so let's just bring up the sheet texture which was there. Zoom this in. Let's turn off for the minute the syncing. Okay, we can see clearly the bits of the sheet that are under the bed because they're very dark and not going to be seen. This is the kind of the sides, and then obviously the top. But these are all under the bed. So if I turn on the syncing again, and let me put this into a vertex mode because it's probably going to be easier to see. Let me bring this up. Let me drag this across so we're working more. Right, so if I got the syncing on, let me deselect everything. Your UV remains there. Anything you select here will be selected on the top model. So for example, if I was just to circle select a bunch here, you can see it selecting on the 3D view. Right, so what we could do is with some of our tools, our circle select or box select, is we can start to highlight some of this geometry that is never going to be seen. Being careful not to go too far in, because if you do, for example, if I was to delete this vertex here, actually let's have a look at that. Let's see how it works in real life. Okay, so this vertex here is hidden, it's behind the frame, but if I was to delete this, so let me just delete this, it's leaving a hole here because although it was outside of the area, that vertex still needs to be there to complete these faces. So let me edit back out there. Whereas same with this one. Whereas if I went one vertex behind and deleted it, it makes no difference to it. So you need to be careful of that. You need to allow enough around the edge of the sheet that it's not going to start causing holes. Okay, so that's how you can, one or two ways you can reduce your geometry yet still maintain the overall look.